I don't care. I'll do whatever you two would like me to do. You tell me. One of you want to call it to order, or otherwise I can.
Nah, I'll leave it up to you.
Just make it.
I'm not using the gavel.
No, would like to make a motion.
Good evening. If it'll stop the motion. Good evening, everybody. We are here for the October 11th, 2023 special meeting to talk about the 2024 city budget. Austin, if you want to take the roll, go ahead.
Stephen Jopek, Eileen Daniel, David Holt, Gerald Anderson, Thomas Kelly, Karen Michalowski, Leanne Felton.
Here.
Thomas Barnett. Here. Chris Hannes.
I don't recall us doing the Pledge of Allegiance before, but it's on the agenda, so we probably need to do it, huh? What's that? All right, let's. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. No public comment. Obviously, we don't have a quorum, so this will be an informational meeting. So basically what we're going to do is I have let the finance director, who's been leading the charge, as this is my first year, I'm going to let her just walk through the budget and go over it. If you have any questions, just let us know. Go ahead, Wendy.
So this one should be fairly easy. The first one is the CDBG program. It's low interest loans available to renters and homeowners in the city. It's a revolving loan, and MSA manages this. So whenever we get requests for funding, we just turn it over to Carrie Justman at MSA. And then we go on to the room tax fund. And this one we were looking at the historic revenues that we received. In 2022, our room tax revenue was up to $310,000. So we still want to budget conservatively, but we expect to get at least $280,000 in '24. And then 70% of that revenue gets passed over to the Rhinelander Chamber of Commerce, and then 30% is retained by the city. And we are requesting $40,000 to cover the fireworks and to start trading out some of the picnic tables in our parks for ADA picnic tables. We did some this year, and we'd like to continue to rotate through with the other ones. And then the other transfer out of this is subsidizing the Pioneer Park Historical Complex. Then on to the Downtown Works loans. Right now, we, for 2024, I believe we only have one loan outstanding. And these are loans up to $20,000 at a lower interest rate. And it's another revolving loan fund, but this is managed by the city. So historically and for 24, I just budget for a potential of 4 loans. And then we move on to the shared ride budget. And this one, each year we complete an application for this grant funding, but that application is not available yet. It's usually due like right before December or the first week of December. And I was just checking the dates. I think that I got information later on in October last year. I do know that we have the cost of what the shared ride program is going to be. The federal grant is 32% of that cost. So I know that we have a great potential to get the federal grant funding of $259,000, but I'm not positive on the formula for the state funding. So this is a close estimate. And based on what the actuals are compared to what we put in the application, what our estimates are. If our revenues are less, then there could be a potential for a local share. But on the flip side, if our revenues are higher than what we had anticipated and our expenditures stayed the same, then we could have a potential that we'd repay some of the grant funding. So what we try to do is we try to estimate as close as possible. And the state has an audit that they perform on each year, but unfortunately with staffing turnover and everything, the last time they had completed an audit was 2014. So if you look down in the lower left, there's a fund balance of a negative 151,000. That was supposed to be settled up once these audits were completed, but it has been recommended by the auditors to start making a transfer into this fund to whittle away at that negative fund balance. So this year, we're transferring in 25,000 to just do it in small chunks. And then the landfill remediation, this will be the last year that we can pay for the landfill remediation expenditures out of this fund. We had money set aside, I believe it was from a settlement, but we're going to deplete that in '24. So we get an estimated projection from GHD on what's required to be done in '24 and how much it's going to cost. And the city of Rhinelander pays 44.44% of that cost, which is the 16,000. And there's really only going to be, at the end of '23, 13,000 in this fund. So this year, the general fund is going to have to kick in just under 2,500 for '24. And then in '25, the general fund is going to have to take over the complete expense of this. And then when we move on to the special projects fund, this is a fund that we use for if we have special grants that are covering special programs where it's like fully funded, we can set them aside and track them through the special projects fund. And this is also the fund that we are storing the ARPA funds. So the information in this budget is to continue to spend down the ARPA funds. But it's also a category where if throughout the year, if something came up that all of a sudden we came across a new grant, we could do a budget amendment and put it in here as long as it matches dollar for dollar of what the expenditures are. And then the property and acquisitions doesn't have any activity planned for '24. This started out several years ago with the cable auto remediation where we had funding specific for that project, and then that settled up. And then when we did, we took over the 306 Thayer property, and the expenditure for that was the cost to raise the property, and then the city has ownership of it. So if we were to find a buyer for that, I would just do a budget amendment, but this is where I would put the revenue from the sale of that property. And then we can go on to the historic preservation. This fund has not had any activity in it since 2017. There is a fund balance of $2,132 that I would really like to just spend down and close this fund, but I know there's been talk of historic preservation. And it looks like, looking at the detail ledger, that this 2,000 is coming from, they must have held some tours, some historical tours in the city and collected admissions for that. The only donation that I had seen in there was a specific amount that covered a specific expenditure to repair some columns. And then we can move on to the TIF districts. The first TIF district, we This is the environmental fund. It's the condominiums over by Boom Lake. The tax increment is very close, but it's based on an estimate of what last year's tax levies were from the school district, the city, Oneida County, and Nicolay. I don't have those numbers just yet, so this is just an estimate before we actually finalize the budget. I usually get Oneida County as the last one. I get it last minute, and then I do have to modify it just slightly before it's finalized. But this one has a developer's agreement in it where for the principal and interest payment, if you go further down, it's the 2021A, we had refinanced a borrowing in here. If the increment is not enough to cover that principal and interest, then the developer covers the shortfall. And other than that, there's just, in all of the TIF districts, administrative expenditures in there to manage the TIF districts. And then every year there's an audit on all the TIF districts.
Feel like a monster that's gonna burst out of a wall.
Yeah, I don't
That's
know.
the sound of improvements to our streets. They're getting ready to pave tomorrow, so. It's like the third one in a row we've had this kind of noise.
I was about to go hike with you.
So then moving on to TIF number 5, I'm happy to report that just on Tuesday, we submitted the final accounting report to the state. So this TIF district is now closed. And just today, I made the journal entry. The general fund is going to recapture $56,036. And then the $52,669 is going to be split up amongst the county, Nicolay, and the school districts. And that check will go out tomorrow.
Wendy Bixby cannot be rattled. Just
And then there isn't anything new in the airport business park, TIF number 6. So if anybody has any questions. And then downtown TIF number 8. The unique thing about this is there was an increase in the equalized value. So 23 was the first time that it had tax increment collected for several years. I think it might have been before 2013 that it had an increment. And after 2014, we will get back into the black with this, where we've been in a negative fund balance for several years.
Why is that?
Why is that? I believe with that one, when you start a TIF district, you have to tell them all the properties that are in there, and then they give you the base value. After the TIF district was created, I think a couple of properties became like non-taxable. So then we basically lost our base value. So in order does that make sense? So if it turned over to be like a city building or a county building that they didn't pay property taxes, what we used to collect, we no longer collect.
I just want to see if it goes quiet. When you go quiet, it stopped for a second.
So then we go on to TIF number 9 is print pack. This one is a very favorable TIF district. It's operating very well, and it has a potential for future projects in that. And the mayor and Patrick and I have talked with Ellers to see what our options are. So we've got some ideas of leaving this open just as a potential. But if something comes up, we will definitely bring you guys the information. And then the Toyota TIF is another one that is doing well, but we don't want to close it. We're just kind of keeping it open for future opportunities. And we were advised by our municipal advisors that sometimes it's better to not close a TIF district early because you kind of, especially if one is performing well, because you have a revenue source where you already know that it's successful and you can take on another project. So they're kind of hesitant to close it early. Then going on to the cobblestone TIF number 11, I'm just budgeting, instead of it happening in 23, they're going to be constructing in 24. So I just switched. We have not borrowed for this one, but I switched it over to 23. They would have a developer grant of $450,000. And then this is just kind of a pass through. And then in 25, that's when the debt repayment would come onto the schedule. And then with the Holiday Inn Express, they are progressing nicely. They are hopeful to open up before the end of the year. We have already borrowed the $500,000 for the incentive, and then we have another $900,000 that we'll be bringing to you as a state trust fund loan for the infrastructure costs that they are incurring, that they are going to dedicate to the city when it's complete. And then we did not have a principal payment scheduled for 24, just the interest payment. And then after we close on the state trust fund loan, that repayment won't start until 2025. And then the next page is our debt service for the citywide borrowings. And in the notes section, you can see what the outstanding principal amount is in the final year that it'll be paid off. And the 23 borrowing that we just completed is going to have a payment due of principal and interest in 24. And then we can move on to the capital project funds. For the Oneida Ave project, and we did this also for the Stevens Street project. For the Stevens Street project, we had to borrow money for the local share for that one, and we kept it in a separate fund because we borrowed money. There was just a tiny amount. It was less than $50,000 left over, and to kind of keep things categorized as the projects separately, I started tracking the Oneida Ave project in this fund as well. So the local share, though, is going to come from the Pratt. I'll just transfer that into this fund, and all the expenses are recorded here. Then for the Oneida Ave project, a majority of it is funded by the USDA and the Safe Water Drinking Loan Program. So there is going to be, before the end of the year, it's usually at year end when I get everything wrapped up, that I make a journal entry to reallocate the grant and loan money that we received in the utilities back to this fund so the expenses stay with the street category, but the funding comes back in to cover the expenses. And then the next one is our 23 borrowing. And this, just like every year with the borrowing funds, I budget according to what has been approved as projects and to spend it down to zero each year. And then in 24, depending on what we have spent that we're able to accomplish, I just move it to 25, just spending it down to zero every year. I think I skipped over the 21 borrowing. That should be spent down to zero this year. Yeah, I'm sorry. I've got an extra page that, because on my packet, I didn't update the one single page. And then we move on to the dental insurance. So on this one, I look at how many people we have on which category, how many are on single, how many are on family, what the premiums are, and that's how I calculate what the revenue is. And then we have budgeted $85,000 for the expenditures for each year. And if you look at the history, so far we have had more revenue than expenditures, so this fund started to build back up a little bit. And there still would be enough to cover, even though we're budgeting for a loss in '24, there is enough fund balance to cover that loss. But the actual is more than likely going to be in the positive. So we're not going to change any of the rates for the dental fund. And this one is a self-funded dental insurance. That's why it's separate than the health insurance. We just pay that directly. And then we also have an HRA plan. The amount of participants in the HRA plan has reduced, and the people that are using the HRA plan are actually using the plan where they do have medical expenses that are being covered. Where when we first started this, many people took the HRA plan even though they didn't utilize it. So we actually have a fund balance that started to build, and this is gonna, well, it's still looking like it's gonna increase just a little bit in '24, depending on what our utilization is. But in '23, we're projecting a deficit of 10,000, so the chances are is this fund might just slowly deplete. And that's everything for this one.
I think we're good. If there's anybody that has any questions for Wendy, or anybody out here has any questions? All right, I'm guessing. Yep. Sorry, I'm never going to be the